Rewritten! Ever since Stephen ran away, Garnet's future vision has shown nothing but chaos, destruction, and death to her. But she didn't know why. She didn't know why she kept on seeing Stephen's corpse, Greg's corpse, Pearl's shards, Amethyst shards, Ruby's shards, Sapphire's shards, and she hadn't been able to decipher it before now. She hadn't known the end results, so she didn't know why they were going to be shattered. Only now, when she was finally shown the solution in its full, horrible light, did she know what was going to happen. It was corruption. She'd thought before that Stephen had been attacked and that he was hiding it because he didn't want them to worry about it and he wanted to try and fix it himself. But that turned out to be completely wrong. It wasn't someone coming after Stephen. It wasn't a new danger arising from somewhere else in the galaxy. It was Stephen. He was the new enemy. And even though she still didn't know why this happened or what led to this, she did know that they were all going to die, and the only thing that she could do to try and prevent it was scream. "Get back!" Garnet was warning. "Get back now!" Only some of them seemed to be willing to obey. Greg was staying firmly planted at Stephen's shivering side, yelling back at her, "No! I can't just leave my son in there!" He wasn't going to let go. Garnet felt a horrible flash of the future flood over her vision. Greg, crushed beyond recognition underneath Stephen's stomping paw. She couldn't blink it out of her eyes before it zipped forwards to months from now, seeing Stephen covered in ghastly corruption scars, dead on the floor by his own hand, unable to keep on living while knowing that he'd killed his own father. No, it wasn't real. She had to stop it. Garnet was frozen uselessly for too long to do anything, but it seemed that the others didn't need future vision to know what was about to happen to Stephen's dad. Spinel lashed an elastic arm forwards, wrapping it around him, yanking him back away from the mutated pile of limbs and scales and teeth and claws. It seemed that Spinel had done that just in time, because only a millisecond later, chaos exploded from poor Stephen. He began to grow, rapidly and wildly, swelling bigger and bigger and bigger. He was bigger than the van, then bigger than an elephant, then bigger than a house. Mortifying visions overtook Garnet again, just as they had been ever since Stephen disappeared, petrifying her in place, staring endlessly up at the beast that Stephen was becoming. Pearl, shattered, not bothering to get out of the way. Amethyst, shattered, trying to reach him. Spinel, shattered, not believing that he would ever hurt her. Volleyball, shattered, too scared to run. Ruby's dark red shards, held by Sapphire's trembling hands. Humans, squashed into dark pulp, screaming and running away, unable to escape him. Dead, 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 all of them dead. She was racked with the awful, unimaginable futures, overloaded, frozen in Stephen's shadow, lost in her third eye. And then she fell apart. Sapphire was trying to flee, to escape the future, panicked and scattered, while Ruby fought to stay together. But it was no use. Garnet couldn't do anything to stop it. She only screamed one last cry of horror before she flashed into a bright white light, her two halves melting apart from each other, falling into a compact squarish red gem, Ruby, and a frilly dressed blue gem, Sapphire. Sapphire couldn't see. She couldn't see. Her huge, singular, ice-blue eye was staring into the future, captivated by it. Without Ruby, without Garnet, she couldn't see all the possible futures, only the most likely one. And the most likely one ended in nothing but death. "Sapphire, we have to go, now!" Ruby was hollering at her. Sapphire could hardly see her, not past the visions that were popping and sparking right in front of her face. She crumbled to the ground, wailing, "I can't see! I can't see!" Ruby was going to die. She was watching it happen, forced to see it, unable to look away, knowing that it was going to become real and she'd have to see it twice. Pearl and Amethyst were leaping towards them, trying to help, but that only caused the future to spasm and shake, changing once more. Pearl dead, Amethyst dead, their shards right next to the blue and red of Sapphire and Ruby's. Stephen's talons ripping through his own throat in a gush of blood, the very moment that he discovers what he'd done. "No!" Sapphire desperately tried to warn them. "Stay back! Run! Run!" But they were faster than her future vision predicted. The two yanked up the smaller gems to their feet, darting back again right before a claw slammed down on top of them. Sapphire's nerves were so shocked that she couldn't stand without Pearl's hands. She was blinded by the future as it twisted and writhed once more, shifting to something new again. Everybody running for their lives as Stephen destroys their home. Stephen knocking Lapis out of the air as her watery chains fail to hold him down on her own, escaping into the ocean in a tsunami of rippling waves, swimming with powerful grace, released to the rest of the world. Earth being evacuated by the diamonds, every human forced to leave their homes, flying away in a mech ship to homeworld, the Earth becoming an apocalyptic death pit. The diamonds being forced to kill him, spearing him through the throat, letting him bleed out into the ocean, staining it a sickening maroon. It hasn't happened yet. She has to stop it. She had to stop it. Ruby was being restrained by Amethyst because she kept trying to go back and help Sapphire. But she would win over soon. And then, worse than any apocalypse that could ever take over her home, Sapphire saw Ruby, dead. Sapphire shrieked, "Ruby, run! Go now!" Warned, Amethyst held on to Ruby tighter, stopping her before she wriggled out of her grasp, and that unbearable future was punctured out of her head. But that didn't stop the inevitable fate of the hybrid boy behind her. All of them were yelling, every single one of the gems having their minds set on one thing: get out of the blast zone. Sapphire's eye flicked up again and watched in helpless agony as their little boy was literally tortured into insanity by his own corruption. Stephen's limbs shot outwards from his body, all 6 of them, claws curling at the end and slamming down on the pavement. Spines as long as spears erupted from his skin, forcing their way outwards and scraping towards the sky like mountaintops. Massive hooked fangs were packed inside of his maw, one that was now curled and snapping like a giant lizard's. On either side of his face was 2 horn-like tusks, another set over his forehead, the rough, thickened scales twisting his features into something monstrous and almost unrecognizable. Stephen grew and grew and grew, a tangle of a lashing tail, an arching back, a snapping jaw, and 6 heavy legs. They would die within seconds if they got anywhere near him, and near was beginning to be the whole street. All the gems could do was begin to run, with Spinel and Volleyball fighting with Greg to keep the human out of danger, Pearl and Amethyst dragging Ruby and Sapphire off their feet and away from the slamming tail and scraping claws. They didn't get to see the moment the horrifying transformation was complete. All they were doing was trying their best to make sure they didn't die, while shouting warnings to any humans who could hear. "Everyone run! Get out of here, run!" They didn't even look back until they were several blocks away, and when they did, the crystal gems had never been more afraid. Sapphire always got erupting visions like this whenever something horrible and life-changing is happening. But this was worse than any event that she'd ever gone through. The worst that she'd gotten before this was whenever she'd been destabilized by Jasper. She'd been falling apart, tipping backwards, staring at Stephen and knowing that it very well could be the last time she ever saw his face, seeing the billions of futures where they took him prisoner, tortured him for punishment, experimented on him as he screamed and screamed and screamed before finally trapping him in a dungeon far away from the light, no hope of her ever finding him again. But all of that seemed like a slight inconvenience compared to what she was seeing now. Death, death. Everywhere, all she could see was death. They were doomed. The terror that was looming above them was roaring and writhing, struggling to get its feet under itself, its tail swiping through the air like a morning star, the heavy 5-pointed club at the end wrecking the pavement and buildings where it hit. The beast was so large that they easily loomed over the lighthouse, stretching even taller than White Diamond did. Each of his 6 legs were solid and powerful, a column of bone wrapped in thick ropes of muscle, tipped with claws the size of cars. Every inch of his skin was covered in layers upon layers of pink scales, each of the hundreds of overlapping discs bigger than a whole person. A forest of spikes sat on top of the shoulders, over the back and along the tail, curling above his head with a doubled set of crooked horns like a crown. The spikes bristled and clattered against one another, taller than trees, every one of them pointed outwards in defense, prickling over his scales angrily. His gnashing maw was crushing and jagged, probably capable of swallowing a whole house. It had 4 eyes mashed into a single pair, the 2 orbs of white melted and fused together forcefully with the diamond-shaped pupils rolling around madly in the sockets. They could see Stephen's pink jacket torn on the tips of its horns, flapping in the wind like a war flag. He was mortifying, he was gigantic, he was deadly. Stephen was completely corrupted. he was a monster.